Since July, my husband has been periodically announcing this countdown. 35 weeks, he'll declare to his boss, to me, to our 2 cats. The countdown of his started in July when we realized we only had 12 months left here in New Hampshire. 12 months before we left our jobs, before we said goodbye to my family, before we moved all of our belongings 1,100 miles south to Tennessee, and 12 months before I started seminary. This exciting realization was also kind of anticlimactic. Big things were scheduled to happen. Everything was going to change, but not for 12 months. It's kind of like a whole year of Advent. 12 months of preparing, expecting, and waiting. To help with all the preparing, expecting, and waiting, I thought a reading list might be a good idea. I reached out to clergy I knew and asked what I could read to build spiritual resilience. I wasn't looking to get ahead with theological texts that will be assigned when I'm in seminary. No, I was looking for novels, poetry, memoirs, nonfiction, anything that would strengthen me for this day next year when, overtired and overwhelmed, I'm on the verge of howling. I'm sick of thinking about God. I don't want to write any more papers, and I want to go home. #inevitable. Our local clergy, who with the nature of their work, are experts in refueling their own spiritual resilience, did not disappoint with their book recommendations. I'm now 4 months into a long and diverse list of books. What I'm going to share with you today is from one of those recommended books. Alice Courtwright recommended a book of poetry named Sinner's Welcome by Mary Karr, which contains this poem. Who the meek are not. Not the bristle-bearded Igors bent under burlap sacks, not peasants knee-deep in the rice paddy muck, nor the serfs whose quarter-moon sickles make the wheat fall in waves they don't get to eat. My friend, the Franciscan nun, says we misread that word meek in the Bible verse that blesses them. To understand the meek, she says, picture a great stallion at full gallop in a meadow who, at his master's voice, seizes up to a stunned but instant halt. So, with the strain of holding that great power in check, the muscles along the arched neck keep eddying, and only the velvet ears prick forward, awaiting the next order. You probably remember when Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Well, what I'm getting from Karr's poem is that we should be careful not to mislabel weak, poor, or timid things as meek. Instead, Karr is suggesting that the powerful and the privileged can too be meek and therefore be blessed if they're humble enough to rein it in, to wait, and to listen. If we entered into the imagery in this poem, we'd notice that a big stallion at a full gallop is a force to behold. even dangerous, perhaps, to those standing in their way. But this stallion, when hearing its master's voice, comes to a screeching halt. This stallion listened and obeyed, even though it was stunned at the command, it was willing to stop. By the poem's definition, the stallion wasn't weak, but it was meek, because it was humble enough to resist an opportunity to be dominant and privileged and in control. The liturgical season of Advent encourages us to emulate this same kind of meekness. It asks us to resist the Christmas busyness, the retail mania, and all the overindulgences of the season. While Advent helps us to prepare for the Christmas celebration, which honors the birth of Jesus 2,000 years ago, the transformative element of Advent comes when we reflect on how to prepare ourselves and the kingdom for Jesus' return. The stallion was meek by reining it in, waiting, and listening. And we are called to follow its example during the 4 weeks of the Advent season. Being meek, or reining it in, waiting, and listening on a daily basis is, of course, easier said than done. But a good place to start is an Advent practice. Some options include Zooming into one of St. Paul's Advent discussion groups, coloring in your daily Advent calendar, joining others around the world in posting a themed #Advent word image, reading a daily Advent devotional, and watching more of these daily Advent meditations. Just like my year-long reading list, Advent practices such as these really do encourage meekness, strengthen our connection to God, and build up our spiritual resilience. Now, if resilience is defined as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, or 3, grit. Grit, what a great word, grit. Then spiritual resilience might be the capacity to persevere through circumstances that challenge our faith in God's goodness or our dedication to the practices of the faith. We don't know anything about that this year in 2020. No.
Out now that no Christmas is coming, they're just waking up. I know just what they'll do. Their mouths will hang open a minute or two, then the Who's down in Whoville will all cry, boo-hoo. That's a noise, grinned the Grinch, that I simply must hear. He paused, and the Grinch put a hand to his ear. And he did hear a sound rising over the snow. It started in low, then it started to grow.
Now, as you may remember, this tale of Dr. Seuss has a hard-hearted Grinch who has stolen away the physical trappings of the Who's down in Whoville's beloved Christmas traditions. He took the stockings from the mantle, he took the presents from under the tree, and he even robbed them of everything in the refrigerator. Thinking that the Who's down in Whoville will not be able to celebrate Christmas and Christmas will be canceled just as he wanted. Little does the Grinch know that those Who's down in Whoville were a resilient bunch. Despite the fact that there was no food, gifts, or decorations, they sang and loved on one another until that Holy Spirit like star shone over the village. Their joy was the one thing that could not be stolen from them, and that was all they needed to celebrate Christmas. Now, granted, this book was written for children, so it doesn't get into the initial reaction of the Who's down in Whoville, when they first realized that all their belongings had been stolen. I'm imagining there was probably some cursing, and that some guy over here kept going on about how this was just totally unprecedented. And then some lady over here just kept saying cheerfully that maybe this was just the new normal. You see where I'm going with this? A Grinch called COVID-19 has stolen from us. While most of us still have the physical trappings of Christmas, the food, the gifts, the tree, we don't have the physical proximity to those we love. While writing this, I turned into a puddle of tears, just wondering and hoping that I'll be able to hug my parents before I leave for seminary. I think many of us have had moments like this, thinking about grandchildren or friends and just missing their physicality. 2020 requires an absurd amount of spiritual resilience. I think we're all running on low, if not empty. This year especially, I hope Advent is a time when we can replenish some of that spiritual resilience. Not seeing these 4 weeks as just a means to get to Christmas, because Advent can be so much more than that. Advent asks us to rein it in, wait, and listen. And the resulting meekness strengthens our relationship with God. The meekness of the Who's down in Whoville blessed them with the ability to triumph over adversity. The stallion's meekness endowed it with the capacity to both hear and trust its master's guidance. Meekness builds spiritual resilience because it puts us in a more persistent communion with God. And that persistent communion with God strengthens us for those inevitable times in life when, seemingly overnight, a metaphorical Grinch robs us clean. Advent blessings to you, friends. I miss you.